We're going to do a beautiful talk from a woman who is originally from Greece, but is now working as a counselor and a psychotherapist in the UK. And she will take us on a journey that will reveal how the suppression of psychedelics can reflect the suppression of the feminine. So, ladies and gentlemen, Femtheogenic consciousness, invoking our connection with the world soul. Maria Papaspiru.
Hi guys, welcome to the 10th edition of the Boom Festival. I've been attending Boom for 15 years now, and I've seen it grow from a really funky, cool psychedelic baby to its true visionary potential. And every Boom summer is a summer full of inspiration and full of magic. And every summer I think they can't possibly do any better than that. And every time I come back, they just fucking do. So this year they're invoking the feminine, and this year they're summoning very powerful forces. I'm going to do the talk. We're going to have some time at the end for questions, but also thoughts, reflections, ideas. If it doesn't have a question mark at the end, please share. We can sort of have a circle and see what we all think about things. Femtheogenic consciousness. Everyone has asked, what is femtheogenic then? So, two words, feminine and entheogens. And then they go, and what is entheogens? So entheogens is psychedelics. Psychedelics means mind manifesting, entheogenic means God manifesting. So it's the sacred side of psychedelics. The word psychedelic is very loaded, and it attracts unconscious thoughts immediately. And I try to avoid it because I think we're rediscovering entheogens, and we need to use understanding and language that allows us to move away from what we already think about these things. And I'd like to start by unveiling the goddess, because the goddess is not a one-dimensional entity. She's a very complex creature. And I'd like to take some time to consider her various phases. I like to think of her as a crystal, with its surfaces reflected by the light, because the more we hold the crystal under the light and we move around it, the more of its color and depth illuminates through. And that reminds me of her complexity, because the more we connect with who the goddess is, the more of her essence unfolds before us. And it takes time to really see the goddess, because she's very elusive and she's wrapped in veils of mystery. But if we remove her veils of mystery, we recognize that she's very relevant to all of us, because the feminine is an elemental pattern we all carry within ourselves, whether we're men or women. And we also come to recognize that she's very relevant to everything around us, because the feminine is the one half of the divine androgen, which is the deepest archetype that runs through creation. So in talking about the feminine today, I'm talking about the archetypal feminine rather than the personal feminine. The personal feminine is your own mother. The archetypal feminine is the great mother, or the great goddess, or Virgin Mary. So you get the difference between the two. As an archetype, the feminine is always and ever present. She pushes through the collective layers of our unconscious, which is where the archetypes live. And she speaks to us in many voices. She speaks to us individually, and she speaks to us collectively. But while she's never absent, we very often fail to take notice of her, because we don't know how to recognize the feminine today, and we don't know how to hear her daily whispers. We have reduced her great depth into a very flat version of womanhood. Gareth Hill is a Jungian analyst who's done a lot of work around the feminine and the masculine, and I'm going to borrow some of his work around the feminine so we can have a look at her. He has managed to map out the most essential qualities of the feminine and her great depth by dividing her into aspects, the static and the dynamic. The static feminine is linked to motherhood and nourishment. She holds within her body deep primal secrets of creation. She's able to conceive the potential of life and give birth to it, participating in the greatest mystery of life on earth. That mystery is the ability to manifest the soul into material life. But we've forgotten how great that mystery is today, and we just see it as a series of very dry medical processes, procedures, and terms. But in that mystery, the feminine is the embodiment of creation and regeneration. And it's the link with regeneration that makes the feminine central for our collective healing processes. Woman magic and earth magic are linked. They both create and they both nourish life. And it is the static feminine that's linked to nature. Here, the feminine is in harmony with nature, and she supports the collective goals of nature, which is species preservation and survival. Our ancestors noticed that link between the feminine and nature, and at first it was a great point of worship, until man tried to control, suppress, and manipulate both. And he developed a very deep imbalance in his relationship with both. The dynamic feminine is very different. It's very hard to pin into words. It's very hard to get a grasp of. The dynamic feminine is intuitive, and she free flows according to what fate brings her way. She engages with direct experience, and she reaches through to knowledge that belongs to the very deep inner worlds. She has a relationship with the invisible. We can see the dynamic feminine when we see children playing, because it's that authentic, spontaneous way of being. We can see her energy when we see the chaos of the forest floor, because she has that link to chaos with its regenerative aspect. And she's also the force behind all evolution. She's part of that creative synthesis where all possibilities emerge out of. The spaces the dynamic feminine represents can be ecstatic and fascinating, but they can be terrifying and disorienting. And these are places that as a society we've tended to avoid, resist, and ignore. And that has left her without priestesses in our society. In the absence of her guide, she meets us in the lands of the unconscious and older states of consciousness. There, she channels her transformative energies to us that link our matter to our soul and support the expansion of our consciousness. But again, we don't know how to listen, because she uses the archaic symbolic speech of dreams and imagination, and we don't know how to translate that language. Today, we understand language, which is a masculine principle. Language is the rational and ordered container of experience. The lands beyond that space belong to the feminine, and that's where we meet that which is beyond words. The myths we've linked the feminine in, they have controlled her essence, and they have drained her enormous strength and power. And it's the same with the words we've held the feminine in. We've labeled the feminine emotional, irrational, chaotic, subjective, hysterical. And by holding her in these worlds, we've linked her with energies that our society has always feared and tried to control. But the word feminine stands for the soul. It is a reference to the cosmic threads that connect us to each other and to the rest of creation. It is a reference for our interconnectedness and our space within a sacred order. The archetypal feminine is a link to oneself, she is a link to life, and she is a link to the divine. The feminine is also extremely psychedelic. She shares entheogenic qualities that can heal, transform, and support the expansion of our consciousness. These qualities the feminine shares with entheogens have also been major points of suppression for both, because these are qualities that go against the grain of our Western mindset. In the Garden of Eden, Eve took a bite of the apple from the sacred tree of knowledge, and this was a mythos that repressed the feminine and expanded awareness into sin within our consciousness and merged them with the shadow side. That was the point humanity fell into duality. Up until that point, the badness was somewhere out there, carried by a snake, but from that point onwards, humanity got wrapped in it. The paradox had no solution. We were either in the garden or out of it. Mythologically, this was the point our egos developed. To leave the garden was to become aware, and that's self-aware. Up until that point, we lived in the unconscious Eden. We have since kept femtheogenic consciousness in exile. We have systematically maintained its inferiority, and we've remained very suspicious of its depth and potential. The feminine and entheogens have been repressed because their force and energy could not be assimilated by our species. We have distorted both to a diabolical form, and we've seen them as dangerous and seductive forces. So what is this space that the feminine and the entheogen share? What are the femtheogenic teachings, and why have these been denied by patriarchy? So we'll take a time to have a look at this. One of the major insights femtheogenic consciousness opens us up to, of course, is connectedness and oneness. For centuries, we've been caught in the illusion of our separateness, and we've become alienated from Earth, each other, and the deepest nature of our own selves. In our separateness, we have disconnected spirit from nature and creation from creator. We have forgotten nature is not something out there, but nature is what we're made of. And from that place, we're not able to connect deeply to those around us or even to ourselves. Boom Festival has been transmitting the message for many years. We are one, and that oneness is a spiritual connection. It's a connection, it speaks about the reflections we emit to each other. We're all mirrors of our shared humanity, and we all hold each other within ourselves. But that oneness is not just a metaphysical idea. That oneness is what chaos theorists have called the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flaps its wings on one continent and weeks later creates a hurricane on another continent. It is the oneness we see in the effects of industrialization, deforestation. It's a very real and direct experience of the world around us that we're becoming more and more aware of. But the feminine is by nature aware that everything is connected. This is a knowledge the feminine has always carried within her body, where all life emerges and regenerates from. Entheogenic spaces also have an inherent understanding of that oneness. In these spaces, we witness the threads that connect us to each other. And that femtheogenic space of connectedness that is revealed to us by the feminine and entheogens at its core has eros and love. And to recognize this is to awaken to one of the most powerful forces in the universe. The next femtheogenic link relates to boundary-dissolving experiences. As I've already said, our societies have been based on divisive boundaries that maintain the illusion of separateness. And the ultimate and most dreaded boundary to cross is the dissolution of the ego. The ego is a huge machine on which our whole current social illusion is based on. The ego has been a big part of our evolution, and as a concept in itself, can be useful in many ways. It can have many useful functions. What is dysfunctional is our need to hold on to it. Because the ego needs to undergo many deaths if it is to evolve into a more authentic version. We need to peel through our layers to get to the core of who we really are. Motherhood is a fundamental experience of boundary dissolution where the other is contained within oneself. And that's not just a physical experience of boundary dissolution, because that symbiotic bond extends way beyond the birthing process. Entheogens are based by their very nature on the dissolution of boundaries on many levels. In these experiences and in these spaces, the divisive lines between past, present, and future, us and other, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, it all dissolves. And that's the most threatening aspect of entheogenic journeys, both for individuals and for the general status quo. And that's where femtheogenic consciousness delivers us to a point where in order to evolve and transform, we need to transcend our own boundaries and in the process be released from our false selves. The next femtheogenic link relates to chaos. We have tried to tame chaos for centuries because we've believed it to be one of our greatest survival threats. It's not always been like that. We've had a couple of lucid points in history. The early Gnostics and the early alchemists recognized chaos as a vital element in the creative process of transformation. But today, we relate to chaos as a state of disintegration rather than a stage of transformation. As I've already said, our ancestors linked nature with the feminine. And as they gradually saw nature as something chaotic that needed to be controlled and mastered, they transferred that onto the feminine. And that's how our unconscious link between the feminine and chaos got installed. But, as we've already seen, the feminine has her own relationship to chaos in the form of the dynamic feminine. And that's a relationship to the true force of chaos, the regenerative aspect of chaos. Entheogens embrace chaos and its transformative potential, and they teach us it is a very valued stage in our unfolding process of becoming. During a deep entheogenic journey, we're taken apart and then put back together. Chaos gives birth to new order that's more complex than before, and that's a step further in our evolutionary journey. A big part of what has driven our relationship with chaos, the feminine, and nature underground is our collective difficulty to be with chaos. And femtheogenic consciousness has the capacity to revive that relationship in a very meaningful way. The next femtheogenic link, it's another very pleasant topic, relates to the vital cycles of life, death, and rebirth. For our ancestors, the vital powers of fertility and birth, the feminine holds, were linked to what they saw in nature, the vital cycles of life, death, and rebirth. And they learned from nature that death is not an end in itself. Death is a process of regeneration. Today, we relate to death with dread, unable to face its deeper essence and relate to it on a deeper level. We're all involved in a collective denial of death. The goddess that gives life is the goddess that takes life. Creation gives place to destruction. Destruction that's in service to life gives place to creation. A very powerful symbol of that wisdom is the archetypal feminine goddess Kali. Kali is a goddess that's in constant movement. She creates to destroy, she destroys to create, and she doesn't care about our ego's demands for survival. For her, there are no opposites. For Kali, all experience is one, life or death. We can only recover our deep inner treasures by meeting the dark side of the goddess, the dark side of the archetypal feminine, the devourer and the transformer. And it's quite similar with entheogens. The most powerful entheogenic journeys that people report the most profound, significant, and lasting changes from are the ones that are held within a supportive setting, I have to emphasize that, and they unfold into the ultimate spiritual experience of ego death. Femtheogenic consciousness allows us to escape our ego, if only for a second, and receive a wisdom that necessitates death and even welcomes it. That's not to say that death, loss, change are not painful transition portals, because they really are. They're very hard to handle. This is to also access the femtheogenic wisdom that teaches us it is the ego that grieves. On a soul level, things are very different because our souls know that every end is just a drop in a very vast ocean. The next femtheogenic link relates to time. Now, time has been a major symbol of our societies, and we've learned to treat it as a fixed and static concept. But the feminine rhythms of regeneration reveal timelessness. The goddess of birth contains a soul that moves through various birth canals. She participates in a mystery that intersects time. It goes beyond time. And it's the same with entheogenic spaces. They also reveal to us timelessness. In these spaces, we encounter mysteries that defy our logic. And they allow us to move through past, present, and future in the most extraordinary ways. So femtheogenic consciousness has the capacity to allow us to witness and experience a very different sense of time. The next femtheogenic link relates to creativity. Patriarchy has suppressed our creative forces by focusing on the mind and the logic. But femtheogenic consciousness supports the creative dimension of our evolution. The goddess, the feminine, is the creative matrix of life for our spaces, and that's her link with creativity. Entheogenic spaces are highly creative spaces. They speak to us through symbols, images, feeling states that are carried forward by visions. And these create metaphors that allow us to connect to that which is beyond words or beyond immediate perception. our society has not acknowledged the healing and creative potential of these states, and we've only known them as dangerous, destructive, and very chaotic states. Now, I've spoken about femtheogenic wisdom quite a bit implicitly and explicitly, and I'm referring to a very particular kind of knowing. Femtheogenic knowing is intuitive, it's non-linear, and it's informed by the creative source. The femtheogenic knowing reveals to us the invisible, and that includes the invisible corners of our psyche. In these spaces, we meet our shadow. This is where the shadow lives, in these hidden corners that never get looked at. Claiming our darkness and our shadow helps us cultivate compassion for ourselves and in reflection for others. Here we meet the limitations of our human experience, and this is where the heart works on forgiveness. This deeply reflective space is the land of paradox. Here, light and dark collaborate, trying to heal our psychic divides. Femtheogenic consciousness opens us up to spontaneous, instinctual, and authentic ways of living. In trying to shield ourselves from our impermanence and our lack of control, we've created a reality and a world that we know as concrete. And that concreteness has offered us some safety, but it can also lead to staticness, staleness, and ultimately deadness, which is the very thing our egos are ironically trying to avoid. But it leaves us in a very difficult position. It leaves us operating from a state of doing, and we haven't learned how to operate from a state of being. The feminine, however, is not bounded by rules or order. She exists in a freedom that is full of potential. And it's the same with entheogens. By dissolving our egos, they allow us to die and rebirth infinite times, shaking away our social masks and helping us question the unquestionable. Who we become under the guidance of femtheogenic consciousness can be far wider and broader than what the stagnant social matrix allows us to ever imagine. The final link is the unconscious. For Jungian analysts, consciousness was always associated with the masculine, and the unconscious has always been the terrain of the feminine. And as we've seen, it's the dynamic feminine that has a link to these invisible symbolic spaces in our soul. And she brings the spaces up for us through dreams, imagination, creativity, also states of consciousness. Entheogenic spaces also bring unconscious material into consciousness, and they allow us a glimpse of our undercurrent realms. Femtheogenic consciousness creates the potential, it's only a potential, for our conscious and our unconscious selves to meet and hopefully integrate. And that paves the way for our psychological journey towards wholeness. Now, these are the links I could come up with between the feminine and entheogens, but any thoughts, any suggestions, any ideas at the end, I'd really like to hear about them. I've called it consciousness because how we relate to these concepts can have a profound effect on how we relate to the world around us and how we experience the world around us. And they can also have a profound effect on our moral and ethical values. Femtheogenic consciousness can support our collective healing, but for that to happen, we need to retrieve and revive its true and deeper essence from our unconscious. Because patriarchy has suppressed femtheogenic consciousness very deep into our unconscious. Patriarchy is a paranoid state of consciousness that tries to suppress anything that threatens its structures or holds any potential for power. And it has actively waged the war against the feminine and entheogens. Patriarchy is not just faulty logic, it's not just thinking gone wrong. Unfortunately, it's a power system, and it takes very strong and resilient movements if it's ever to be truly challenged. Patriarchy creates and maintains inequalities. It creates and maintains very unjust power relations. It tries to suppress any true form of authenticity, and it teaches us that our value as a person is linked to our position in its system. We believe that, and we play the game. And on our way, we adopt a false self and a false self-idealization. Patriarchy fools us into believing that we actually are who we appear to be. But patriarchy today is not synonymous with masculinity. Women can act as divisive dominators just as much. Patriarchy today is a collective responsibility. We're all part of a culture that attacks the feminine and nature in all of us. And we all need to delve deep within ourselves and ask ourselves, when have I played a part in her oppression? And when have I betrayed her deeper essence? I'll give you an example on that. I work as a therapist, and I work with a lot of young people, and I work with a lot of young women, young girls. And it's quite incredible how often they come into the space and they bring their narrative. And in that narrative, there's this familiar to me by now space that it says it gets expressed in various ways. It's either a sentence that says, oh, I don't trust women, or I don't like women. Women are bitches, they really backstab you, or they're really boring, you know. I'd rather hang out with the boys. And these women seem to really not realize they're feminine themselves, and that what they say betrays how they feel about themselves and their deepest nature. But these women have taught me how deeply ingrained our gender belief systems are, that teach us that men are more important, more intelligent, better and cooler friends to have, and that women have very little to offer in return. And you know that might be true to some extent, because we have dissected the feminine and we have thrown her essential elements away. We've lost our connection and our knowledge to her ancient mystery traditions, and we've denied her wisdom in the rational and scientific world we have created. Patriarchy and its children do not know the goddess. We have misunderstood her potential. And we have misunderstood the power of her link to the very fabric of life. Now, patriarchy has also alienated and wounded the masculine by its attacks on the feminine. By devaluing the feminine, patriarchy has also attacked the feminine within men, because as I said, it's an elemental pattern we all hold within ourselves. We all have a masculine side and a feminine side. But patriarchy has also alienated men from the feminine outside themselves. It has split them between their need to idealize women and the need to control and dominate women, and they're not able to bridge that gap in between. We can witness the cultural neurosis, I like to call it, against the feminine in various examples. And I've chosen the witch hunts because it's an example where women and herbs were once again thought of as evil. So the witch hunts is one example amongst many that illustrates what lies beneath patriarchy. Now, the witch hunts happened between the 14th and the 17th century. Over 1 million women were killed in that time. During that time, men accused the wives to the Inquisition of having erotic encounters with demon lovers that satisfied them more than they could. So the inquisitors would visit these women, strip search them, and look for the devil's mark. And those that were carrying the devil's mark were either hanged or burned at the stake. The inquisitors believed that witchcraft comes from erotic lust, and they considered the feminine erotic lust to be a frightening and powerful force that linked her to the devil. Now, the witch hunts is one example, unfortunately, amongst many that illustrate that what lies beneath patriarchal domination is men seduced by power and threatened by the thought that someone else out there might have a bigger and more potent penis than their own. That threat of impotence and death, instead of being faced and worked through, it's been suppressed. And it's been acted out in various forms of aggression, rage, and violence. And that includes warfare. But the ironic outcome of repression is that what is repressed out of fear re-emerges in the form of its repression. This is not about the absence of the feminine, because the feminine or the masculine can never be absent. This is about the distortion of the feminine that exaggerates the tragic imbalance between the two. This imbalance is undermining our civilization, bringing us near to a possible collapse and possible extinction. Death has not been held at bay. Death has been elicited in indirect ways. Through our disconnected intellect, we have raped the earth we live on. We have disrupted the intricate balance of our planet. We have created phallic missiles of mass destruction. And we have disguised the impotence of patriarchy as power that expresses itself in genocidal behavior. The goal of development for Jungian analysts is individuation. It's the development into one's full self and full potential. We can only individuate by integrating our shadow. Patriarchy has repressed the feminine in our collective shadow, and unless we retrieve her and integrate her with the masculine, we will continue to act out on our neurotic fantasies and endanger our life on this planet. To integrate the feminine with the masculine is to integrate the mind with the body and the spirit with the matter. Now, patriarchy has also had a little bit of problem with psychedelics. Patriarchy does not tolerate psychedelics, and psychedelics do not tolerate patriarchy. Patriarchy has traditionally favored substances that maintain divisive boundaries, create a mindless state, and support the status quo. Terence McKenna has spoken about the link on the ban of entheogens, the suppression of the feminine, and the rise of patriarchy. And he's also outlined the link between states of consciousness and production lines. So he has famously said, in our lunch break, we're always encouraged to have a coffee break. And it's true, in my workplace, it's for free. You just go and help yourself. But we would never be encouraged to have a pot break, because that would throw production out of the window, of course. So the substances we are favoring, which is caffeine, sugar, alcohol, are all implicitly maintaining the status quo and the system we're all part of. Now, entheogens make us question what it all means and why things are as they are. And they help us consider alternatives that are more people and more planet-friendly. They cut through our cultural conditioning, and they offer us a wider lens through which we can examine what we call reality. They catalyze imagination, and they catalyze the expansion of our consciousness. But very importantly, entheogens revive the broken feminine, and they filter all her essence through to us. Now, it is not a coincidence that during the 50s and 60s, when psychedelics were widely available in the West, a new moral compass started to get installed. In that time, under psychedelic expansions, the feminist movement and the ecological movement emerged, amongst many others. And that was the time where all forms of oppression were questioned, and people started saying, I'm not quite sure that's right. And there was... these were early seeds that were still growing today. So this gave patriarchy a really clear message. Entheogens do not support the maintenance of rigid hierarchies, and that's a major threat for patriarchy. Patriarchy has responded to that threat by doing a very good job at making us believe that the use of entheogens is an immoral and antisocial threat. And it has validated the criminal persecution of cognitive liberty, which is the freedom and the right to enhance or alter one's consciousness. The recovery of femtheogenic consciousness is essential for the recovery of our political, our social, our economic, our environmental, and our spiritual systems. This is the dark bit now. On an individual level, our levels of unhappiness are immense, and our narcissism makes us feel powerless, paranoid, and with very low self-esteem. We have neglected our hearts, and we have deprived ourselves from the sanctuary of community and relationships. Instead, we lead our lives increasingly more from cyberspace, where our false selves thrive, and we disconnect further and further away from who we truly are. In that state of internal and external alienation, we give in more and more to diseases of the mind and the body. But nothing exists in isolation. as femtheogenic consciousness knows and teaches us all too well, our individual psyches are reflected onto our societies. And our individual crisis translates to a horrifying social crisis. Our societies are based on consumerism and materialism that we refuse to moderate. Our postmodern deities are the pound, the dollar, the euro, and the yen. We live in target-driven societies, and we no longer know how to care for ourselves and how to care for each other. We don't know how to support and honor our elders, and we have abandoned our youths to the mercy of ruthless media that shrink their souls and neglect the development of their highest potential. In the meantime, we're very busy. We're very busy waging wars, wars of ideology, religion, and race. We are facing overpopulation, and we have tragic issues. We have hunger, we have water shortages, sanitation, the spread of infectious diseases in various parts of the world, and we're not effectively addressing this. Our individual and our social crisis extends to the ecology around us. We have ravaged the rainforest, we have overfished and depleted our seas, we have contaminated our rivers, we have excavated our mountains, and our ever-increasing demands for food and technology are depleting Earth's natural resources. Our exploitation of Earth is amounting to ecocide as we irreversibly disrupt ecosystems that species depend on. And our ecocidal tendencies are linked with our genocidal tendencies as we're waging wars on the basis of diminishing resources. On a positive note, the moment of crisis is always a potential moment of deep transformation. We have to face our darkness for the old solidified ego boundaries to be shattered. And through the cracks, it's only through the cracks that the possibility of something new can emerge. The process of transformation is always based on the tension of opposites, and we're definitely threading a very thin line. On the one hand is the potential for evolution through the integration of very powerful forces. On the other hand is the danger of social disintegration and regression into our worst possible scenarios for our human nature. In these times of rebirth, very strong, dark, reactionary forces come awake. One example of this is the recent rise of fascism across Europe. These forces have the power to threaten and disempower our visions and reassert the existing status quo. Our ancestors saw nature as the great goddess, powerful and vital. And this was one of our earliest collective blueprints on the nature of God. As the sun god replaced the earth goddess, we lost our connection with nature, and we lost our connection with the most profound source of life and wisdom. That divine source of creation, that world of the soul, was once known as Anima Mundi. Anima Mundi held the knowledge that there's consciousness within matter. Anima Mundi was the light that lived within the center of every living thing. And our ancestors used sacred ritual to activate that light. Today we understand Anima Mundi only as a concept because we no longer live a life that's aligned to its principles. We have forgotten the world is alive, and we've forgotten how to activate that light within ourselves and within nature. As a result, we've disconnected from our creative and imaginative potential, and we've lost touch with the magic stuff. Things like meditation, mantras, breathwork exercises, entheogenic journeys, they all activate aspects of our inner technology, the inner technology of our species, and they all belong to the magical side of our human experience. They return us to an embodied wisdom, and they can transform our ego consciousness into a soul consciousness. A connection with the Anima Mundi can bring us back into connection with our own Anima Mundi. A connection with the world soul can bring us back into connection with our own soul. There's been a lot of talk about the return of the Divine Feminine. And the return of the Divine Feminine is essentially a new mythology for the expansion of our consciousness. It speaks of a change in our attitude towards nature, the planet, and our own bodies. To release the goddess is to upgrade our operational systems from the head centers to the inclusion of our hearts. the return of the feminine as a mythology has the power to deactivate our self-destructive tendencies. And she's a powerful force that speaks to us if only we can listen. And hopefully this year's boom theme and liminal explorations can add to the pool of consciousness that surrounds her, and we can all expand our ability to hear her daily whispers. The masculine and the feminine are the archetypal fundamental energies of the universe. The whole universe is made up from this. And we're being called to create new mythologies that integrate the lunar feminine wisdom with the solar masculine consciousness. A healthy future needs to be balanced by the divine androgen. Evolution for our species at this point is no longer a matter of physicality. It's not about developing a new body part or having a bigger sized brain. Evolution for our species at this point is a matter of interiority. We need to go within and find out who we really are. This is not just about insight. Change means change. We need to die to our jobs, we need to die to our faiths, we need to die to our relationships, we need to die to our old selves, and anything that no longer serves the deepest nature of our true selves. Every one of these deaths is a sacred initiation for the emergence of our true selves. To enter the core is to activate the light that lives within the center of every living thing. To enter our core is to invoke the anima mundi. Women, entheogens, and nature can only be liberated after social revolution brings about structural change. Patriarchy as a system needs to be challenged. There is revolt, sometimes expressed directly and sometimes distorted, like an ingrown nail. But nations around the world are they're trying to shed away the expired political systems and the archaic socioeconomic complexes that are still governing us. On a collective level, we're seeking greater truth and greater freedom, and we're all trying to see through the smoke of eons. We are only one step away from assuming responsibility, which is where our true freedom lies. For these energies to transform, we need the strong container of the goddess, and entheogens are powerful channels of her energy. They realign us to our core, and they remind us of the divine mystery and purpose of being alive. Femtheogenic consciousness can support the emergence of a planetary consciousness. Our crisis is a crisis of consciousness. The world soul is suffering, we are suffering, and we need to remember the world's wounds and imbalances are our own wounds and imbalances. First, we need to rescue our own souls. That's how we participate in the mystery of oneness. Gatherings like Boom are spaces where we encounter the possibility for wholeness. I invite you over the next few days in your entheogenic journeys to recognize the feminine spirit and to allow the goddess to guide you deep within yourselves and deep within your essence. Changes are ripples. They start small and they grow big. They begin within and they spread without. Thank you very much.
Maria Papaspiro. Yes, absolutely. Are there any questions for Maria? Anyone?
I was thinking about your background because you said you studied psychology. And when I think of studying psychology, because I did a few units at uni, it was very statistical, mathematical, mental, and this is a whole different integration and approach. And how did you manage to marry these two together and still call it psychology? Or, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. You can hear me, yeah. Well, I did study psychology, and like you, I thought it was dry and meaningless and got absolutely bored and hardly attended. But luckily, I could then train as a therapist. So my later study was as a therapist. And a lot of the ideas come from Jungian work. So a lot of ideas, and my work is very much influenced by Jungian work. So I think it brings a real depth into the experience of life. And he's the one that honors the soul. Very few people in the psychology or therapeutic field actually speak of the soul, but I think he brings that important concept alive. So do that.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I wanted to ask something. Does knowing this and actually having an activated sensory organs to feel all this, does it make you like a person feel as if they are actually transforming into a righteous being?
Well, ideally, yes, because like I said, I think I said, it's consciousness, because how we relate to these things it is a moral, it's an ethical stance towards the world, towards each other, and towards our own selves. We need an ethical stance towards ourselves as well. But, you know, it's ongoing work. The work is in process. I don't think you ever get there. You have to marry the process. It's an ongoing commitment. But we need to be responsible, I think.
You mean a willing to want to transcend to another level is actually the process in itself of your transformation?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It seems the central point is the ego death and its transformative power, but it also needs a supportive setting. How would you describe one? Like, is there a set of rules or a set of energies around the ego death that would support this difficult process, that would make it easier for all societies to undergo?
Well, I would say it's probably a very high dose to start with. You know, I mean, like I said, there are spiritual practices that focus on dissolving the ego and trying to transcend the ego, and that's a very valid way of going about and doing this. Psychedelics have a way to fast forward you to that point and actually allow you things that might take a very long time to practice, and very few people get there. So it's like the magic pattern that takes you there quite fast. It's not a pleasant experience. It's not, you know, we can talk about it, but to actually go through it, it's a shredding experience. It's a very difficult experience, but it's the experience of rebirthing. It's a necessary process for becoming something more than before. It's an evolutionary process. But it depends. There are many paths that lead to the same road, really, and it's a matter of personality, predisposition, preferences, ability to tolerate, and things like that. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Maria Papaspirou. Yeah, a big round of applause. Amazing.